So the next product we're going to cover is Planiseal VS. So Planiseal VS is a two-component epoxy. It has an A and a B. When those two units are mixed, they equal 3 gallons. The 3-gallon unit will cover approximately 360 to 375 square foot. When it's applied at 14 mils is the wet mil coverage for Planiseal VS.
How many mils?
14 mils wet. When it's dry, it'll be about 10 mils. Okay. When we talked about Planiseal P&B, we talked about porosity, being able to absorb. Planiseal VS is different. So a smooth, burnished home where they've laid the concrete, they usually put power trowels over the top of it to make it real smooth and dense at the surface. That's a CSP of a 1. Most warehouse floors are CSPs of 1. Whenever you take an angle grinder and you grind the concrete, that's a CSP of a 2. And if you use a shot blaster, that'll usually get you a CSP of a 3. So CSP just stands for concrete surface profile. When we're dealing with Planiseal VS, we have to have a CSP of a 2. Okay, so the floor is going to have to be mechanically cleaned. Okay, 2 to 3. So they're either going to have to grind the surface or they're going to have to use a shot blaster. Okay, so it's got to be mechanically cleaned. And the reason is we want to make sure that we've got a profiled concrete surface, so that way when we apply the epoxy, again, it's got to absorb into the surface to where it can start reducing that moisture vapor. Okay. The biggest difference between Planiseal P&B and Planiseal VS is an A and B mixture. So we have a limited amount of time that we can work with the Planiseal VS. Okay. So once we mix the A and the B together, it has a chemical reaction. And then you're going to have about a 5-minute hot life in the bucket before it starts to heat up, kick off. So what we want to do is once we mix it, we want to get it out of the bucket and onto the floor. So we need to make sure we've got good, clean concrete surface. We have a concrete surface profile of at least a 2 to a 3. Make sure that if there are any small cracks that are in the surface of the concrete, that those cracks are cleaned out, and then we can actually fill that in with the epoxy. It's called a gravity-fed epoxy, so we just push it and let the gravity pull it down into the cracks. Okay? That's anything other than 1/8 of an inch. If it's larger than 1/8 of an inch, then we have some other modulus epoxies that we can use to fill those cracks in, like our Planabond EVA. But for slight cracks that are small and dormant, then we can use the VS to fill those cracks in at the same time. With Planiseal P&B, you can't fill cracks with P&B because, like we talked about earlier, if you pour it too thick, it'll foam up, right? So we've got to make sure that we take care of those cracks before we apply the P&B. Okay. With VS, we can do it at the same time. Okay. So what we want to do to start with is we want to make sure that we mix our Planiseal Part A with a low-speed mixer, just to make sure that we can get our liquid mixed before we start heading into the Part B part of the epoxy. So just a low-speed mixer. We don't want to mix it fast. We don't want to put any air into it.
Because we'll have bubbles in it.
Yeah, you don't want to put. Yeah, anytime we're dealing with liquids, moisture mitigation systems, or anything like that, we don't want to introduce air into the product itself because that can cause pinholes and bubbles later on. So what we're going to do is we'll want to mix it for about 2 to 3 minutes on a low speed. Again, just to mix the product up. So we don't want to lift the drill up and down. We don't want to create any air bubbles into the material itself. And make sure that the low-speed mixer if they go high speed, it'll start slinging material everywhere. Planiseal VS it's a single coat application. We only apply 1 coat. 14 mils wet, 10 mils dry, and it'll reduce moisture per ASTM E96 by 96%. Okay. So again, we're going to add Part B to this, and we're going to mix it for, again, 2 to 3 minutes. When we do this part, we want to make sure we get all of Part B out. There's too many times where guys don't get all the liquid out. Another thing I want to mention whenever we're dealing with epoxies in general, we tell you to mix all of part A with all of part B. Okay, because we know what the results are going to be. If you put all of part B into part A, it's going to harden and flash and do what it's supposed to do. A lot of times on job sites, installers want to take a certain amount of part A, a certain amount of part B, and they don't mix it right, so the epoxy stays sticky, it never flashes and gets hard. The chemical reaction that's supposed to happen doesn't happen. Okay, so if you call me and say, can we only use half and half? I'm going to tell you no. It needs to be all at one time. Okay.
Just a minute.
And just remember that, epoxies will put off a strong odor. So make sure that you're using it and ventilated and so again, we're going to add part B to it, and we're going to just mix it on low speed for 2 to 3 minutes. And what we just want to make sure is we get the part B mixed in to where the A and the B are homogeneous, right? Solid unit. So what we're going to do is once this Planiseal VS is mixed properly, if you were on a job site and you mechanically clean the substrate already, there are times where there's such high moisture amounts in the concrete substrate that you may have to let it sit for 24 hours. Okay? If you've been on some jobs where the moisture is extremely high and it's got a high pH, as soon as you demo the floor, what you'll see is water actually form at the surface. Sometimes you'll get the efflorescence or the salts that come to the surface because everything is spiked since we open up that concrete slab and everything wants to equalize so it rushes to the surface. If that happens, then you're going to need to let that concrete slab sit for 24 hours before you go ahead and start the sealing of that concrete slab. Nothing wrong with letting it breathe for 24 hours. Okay? So what you'll notice that's a little bit different about our epoxy mitigation product compared to some others, ours are in plastic buckets. Okay? Part A is 2.2 gallons, part B is 0.8, so it makes 3 gallons total. And then you don't have to worry about the metal. The metals can actually start to cook that epoxy and it can actually start fire. So you have to be real careful about using the epoxy to mix them.
Yeah, 230.
230? Yeah. So the first process whenever we're dealing with Planiseal VS is once it's mixed, we want to get it out of the bucket. This is just a flat blade that we're using here. And basically we're just going to put some Planiseal VS on the substrate itself and just pull a tight thin coat of epoxy to start with, just to help get it absorbed into the surface itself. One of the things I like about Planiseal VS is you can see how it flows out really, really well. So it's really, really easy to spread. It's really easy to work with. It kind of flows similar to the Planiseal PMB does. Some epoxies get thick and are hard to spread and work with, but the VS is real, real easy to work with. So the first step is we just want to pull a thin coat over the entire substrate. Now, if you're working in a room, what I would recommend doing is to start pulling your tight skim coat first. And then once you do that, then you can come right behind it and we can pull it with a notched blade. Okay? They sell these blades at different places. You can get epoxy blades. So what you can do is get a 10 mil dry blade, epoxy blade, so that way when you pull it, it'll leave behind that 10 mil thickness that we need. Okay. So usually this will be a 2-man process. You'll get one guy that's pulling the epoxy tight on the surface, and then you'll get a guy behind him that'll come behind him and then pull the notches. Okay, any questions on the flat blade part? And once that's applied, again, like I said, with the flat blade, we'll come back and then we'll actually pull this with the notches. And when you pull it with the notches, you're going to see that it's going to leave a certain thickness that's on there. And then we can go back again and use that wet mill gauge that we talked about earlier. And then check our thickness. So if you, again, like I said, if you have cracks or anything that you're trying to fill in, you would just pull this material into that crack itself and then let it fill in that void. Okay. So after all that's said and done, and we've checked our thicknesses with the wet mill gauge just to make sure that we're in the right mill thickness, then you would come back in and you would get your roller saturated. And then what you do is you just go ahead and you would roll the floor with a 3/8 inch nap roller to just collapse the notches and make sure you get nice, even epoxy coverage on the surface. Okay? Planiseal BS is going to take approximately 6 to 8 hours to dry. Once it's dry, then we can come back in and prime it with primer T or primer X, one of our primers for non-porous substrates. And then you could come back in on the top of that and then pour Nova Plan 2 Plus or another leveler over the top of it.
Now, question.
Yes, sir.
Why not just roll it?
From the start?
Yeah.
You can roll it if you want. We just want to make sure that we get 14 mils wet, right? So we require that thickness to be applied to the surface. If you can get that with a roller, more power to you. I mean, if you can do that. The issue is that if you use a squeegee blade that's notched, that notched blade is like our trowel when we're installing wood or LVT. It gauges the amount of material that we're putting down. So it's a little bit easier to be able to control the amount of material that we're putting down with the gauge blade. Okay, but some people will use trowels, metal trowels, like we use to spread our adhesives. Some people use epoxy blades because, again, we can gauge the thickness of the material that's being put down. If you can do that with a roller and get that 14 mils, that's what we're looking for. So the thickness is the important part.
You mentioned something about the cracks.
Yeah.
You know, here most of the houses, all the houses have big cracks. Do we have to address those cracks first?
So if the cracks are larger than 1/8 of an inch, they have to be cleaned out. They have to be dormant cracks, which means they're non-moving. Because if there's cracks that are active cracks, there could be something structural happening, right? So we can't control the cracking. We just have to make sure that we can treat the cracks and we treat them properly. And the only way we can do that is by making sure that they're not moving, right? So anything larger than 1/8 of an inch will have to be cleaned out. You can use a high modulus epoxy like Planabond EBA, and then you can broadcast sand into it, and it'll help treat that crack. Okay. If it's a small crack, 1/8 of an inch or under, like a hairline crack, you can clean those cracks out, and the VS will be filled. The VS can be used to fill that in. So again, we're just going to check wet mill gauge. We're at about 12 mils thickness right now. Okay. So ultimately, you want 14 mils. So that way, when it dries, it's going to be that 10 mil dry thickness on the surface of the concrete. If you do this, this is going to help address your moisture issues that you've got in your concrete slabs. Okay. Any questions?
So it's at 12, but you need 14, right?
Yeah, you want 14 mils. So if you're in an area where you notice that you're a little bit thin, typically we would have already poured this out in different ribbons throughout the entire area that we're doing. And this process really is a lot faster than what we're seeing here. When you're on a small board, we're kind of limited because we can't pour the material out. But if we were doing a large room, we'd pour the ribbon along the back, and then we'd be pulling it right behind that guy that's pouring it out. So it's a lot easier and a lot quicker to be able to put that down. And you want to make sure, like I said, you want to get it out of that bucket. After you've mixed it, you want to get it out of that bucket as soon as possible. Because it's going to have about a 5-minute pot life. So it's already starting to, it'll start getting warm. And you definitely want to make sure that you get it out of that bucket so it doesn't cook.
So how much time does that really give you, like for a full bucket?
As far as what?
As drying time on the bucket.
So once you get the material out of the bucket, the material is going to dry in about 8 hours.
Okay. But inside the bucket, as it cures?
So it's 5 minutes.
Yeah, you got a 5-minute pot life. As far as the material flashing off and getting hard,
Yeah.
Probably 45 minutes to an hour.
Okay.
I mean,
That's also dependent on the inside bottom, right?
well, this is a chemical reaction.
Okay.
So this is going to happen regardless of what the conditions are like. So you have to be real careful.
Will it affect it if it's like warmer, like on the hot times?
Yeah.
Will it dry it faster?
Cooler temperatures slow the processes down. The hotter things are, the faster the process is, so you have less time. But once you get this, again, like I said, once you get it mixed, you want to pour it out on the floor in ribbons so you can start pulling the tight skim with that flat blade, and then you can come behind it with that 14 mil wet blade, and then get your thickness. And then the other guy will come behind you, and then they'll start back rolling with this 3/8 inch net roller.
Now, when you're doing a big area,
Yep.
I mean, like you have a little square right here, but let's say I'm doing like an open area right here. Do I have to collect some special shoes to walk on it?
So, yeah, what you could do is you could wear spikes. You know, like sometimes they'll come in these self-leveling kits. So you can put those on so you can kind of walk in the edge of the material. But what I tell most people is you can actually set this up to where you can work in sections to where you don't have to get into the epoxy, right? So you can use extendable handles, get set up to where one guy's pouring it, the next guy's using a flat blade, he's pulling it, and then the other guy, you know, you still got that reach, that's about 12 feet, or 10 feet roughly, that you can reach to be able to still get that material spread out. So you can use spikes to get into the edge of it. You just have to be real careful because those spikes are like being on ice skates.
Is there a time period where one of them could spread it and then the other one could roll it, or it could be happening simultaneously?
Yeah, no, that's exactly what you want. I mean, once you pour it out, you want one guy spreading it, and then you want another guy behind him that's gauging the material line, for sure. There's no time limit between pulling it tight and then spreading it with your blades just to make sure you get that proper thickness. Yeah, absolutely. And it's an assembly line. It's like anything else, right? Once you get the guys in place, the guy that pours it out, he may be the guy that comes back and gets the nap roller in that area. So the next guy is pulling it tight, spreading it with squeegee, and then the other guy is using the 3/8 inch nap roller and rolling it to flatten the material. Once you mix it, you want to get it out of the bucket because it has a 5-minute pot life. So in mass, it's going to heat up and start kicking off faster. So once you get it on the floor and it's not in mass, then it's not going to flash off as fast. So your 5-minute pot life, after 5 minutes in that bucket, it's already going to start reacting. Any questions? And again, once this is done, you have a non-porous substrate. So we got to make sure that we prime over the top of this before we do any floor prep.
So, I have a question.
Yeah.
For disposal. Like all the homes, you know, some, let's say, this how much it covers?
This 3-gallon unit is going to cover about 360 square feet.
So let's say I have a 400 square foot home. I'll still have to purchase the rest. And how do you dispose of what is not, it's already been mixed?
So once it's mixed, you would set it outside, let it flash off. It's going to get hard in a block of epoxy. And then we're going to recommend that you dispose of it per the guidelines. You have to call the dump and see if they require special disposal. Okay?
Just take it outside, don't leave it inside.
Yeah, no. What's going to happen is it's going to start heating up and the material may actually start smoking.
Oh, okay.
So you definitely want to get it outside. Make sure that when you're installing this VS, that there's plenty of ventilation because the fumes can get pretty bad for the installer.